Hey, welcome to Hope Rescue Podcast. I'm Tim. This is Kimberly, and I point out who she is.
Because you have a lot of Kimberlys around, so they need to know which direction I'm at.
I know a lot of Kimberlys. I do. But let me just say that we are glad to be with you because we've been talking about my new book that's out called Breathe.
Yeah.
And Breathe, Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, and Negative Emotions. And this is a 13-chapter meant to be read one chapter a week over 13 weeks, a 90-day process of really taking a look at your emotions from a biblical perspective and letting God transform your life. One of the big problems, in fact, in the book, I refer to fear as the matrix of all negative emotions.
Yeah.
So we've been talking last week, and this week we're going to talk about fear. But if you would like to get a hold of this book, you can do so by going to hoperescuepodcast.org, hoperescuepodcast.org, and a window will pop up. It'll have a picture, I think, of the book or of Breathe or something. And you can follow those prompts and purchase that online from us. We would love for you to get a hold of this. I believe that it'll be life transforming. It's been strong in our lives, not just mine, but in Kimberly's life and my life. So we were talking about fear. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say you can find it on other platforms.
Yeah.
You can order it, but we kind of give a break, don't we, if they go through ours at hoperescue.org?
Well, we give free shipping.
There it is. Free shipping. We have free sheeps.
Actually, it'll be, we're selling it at a price everybody else is too.
Maybe we'll throw in a bookmark too. Yeah. You don't know. we might surprise you.
We do have bookmarks, but they're not that great. Anyway.
They're so great.
They're awesome. But
they set us apart.
Let me just tell you, all the proceeds from this book go to Hope Rescue and our outreach ministries and our teaching, our podcasting, and all of that. So we are not taking profit. I'm not taking profit. Kimberly's not taking profit from this book. It all goes to Hope Rescue, and we would love for you to get a copy of this. So I'll have that right here. But we're talking about fear. So
last week we talked about social fear.
Yes, we did.
And with
fear of
success. And kind of we didn't quite finish our thoughts on fear of success because
that's true.
We're going to be talking about today the fear that we have in parenting and relationship. Actually, relationships and then parenting. But we didn't get to finish the one on success because we were going to talk about fear of success in relationship to being lazy.
Yeah. Well, when you think about somebody that's lazy,
right?
What do you think? What teenager do you think about? So
that is true. Something happens to kids, like from junior high to high school.
An evil eye from our daughter, who, by the way, is
not a
former
teenager. Yeah, she's not.
She is now.
She's never really
well
been lazy.
Into her 20s.
Yes,
a couple of weeks in. All right.
Anyway, the thing is, I'm glad you brought up the whole teenager thing because just like teenagers, adults can be unmotivated to do things that are required of them, but very motivated depending on their own personal interests, like teenagers, because teenagers are super motivated to be able to get to the game or go hang out with their friends.
Or
and
make stuff in the front yard, for goodness sake.
Right,
Our boys
right.
did that.
Well, I'm saying if there is like a payoff in it for them, they'll get those chores done. They'll, clean up this, make, dishes, whatever. Then laziness, when there's a reward, you can get super motivated by that. But a lot of people are considered lazy when it's really just fear. Yeah. Completely locked down in fear. And it's not actual laziness. It's they're frozen in that fear, and it's keeping them.
Success.
Exactly, that success.
Let me just, before you get into that fear of success, or we get into that, I just want to say that a lot of people think of laziness as equivalent to a lack of self-discipline. Mm-hmm. And you take a healthy young male or female, put them on a farm in 1850, and they're going to work like crazy all day and have energy to spare, whereas their parents don't have the same kind of energy, but they work all day. It has to do with motivation. Sure. So it's not about self-discipline. Right. When we live in a world where we're unmotivated. We have passive entertainment. We have cell phones. We can scroll at nonsensical videos, which are pretty good, by the way.
Yeah, we
But
do
anyway,
that a little bit.
and then passive entertainment like TV or whatever,
Yeah.
and video games. Sure. But when you motivate, like our boys would get motivated to build stuff out front, and they would do a
ramps,
great
usually ramps,
with bicycles. They would push their little sister.
They had contests to see who could break the most bones.
Or who could break the most of Gracie's bones.
Yes,
was really the
she
competition.
did break the most.
Yeah. So
actually, at urgent care, they knew me by a first name.
Well,
now
hi,
that's
Mrs.
embarrassing.
Scott.
And in the early years, they're like probably were keeping a file on me, CPS, because it seemed a little too often. But yeah, our kids were not, fortunately, really into the video game thing. They were active, and we kept them outdoors. And they, of course, with that as many as we had, they always had like someone to get in trouble with.
Yeah.
So
if you have somebody in your life who appears to be lazy, it is probably not because of lack of, or not because they don't have self-discipline. It's because they're unmotivated.
Right.
You get a very high achieving academic student who is in a class where it is below their challenge level, and they're unmotivated, and they will actually, in some cases, flunk out. And they're incredibly intelligent and academically savvy, but they're not motivated.
That's a good point.
You get them in a motivation environment, and they will thrive.
And I think the common denominator there is that they don't feel purposeful in that place.
Yeah, that's right.
And so a lot of people who don't feel like they have purpose do fall into like a lazy category because they're not motivated. You need to know your purpose. And for that overachiever in that class, you don't really have a purpose because you've done it all. You know it all,
Yeah. We have, and we won't say who, but we have children that were not highly motivated academically
in
high school who became highly motivated
yes.
in college and did a great job, or
Just
in
to
trade
be honest,
school or whatever.
Most of our boys in high school, it was more of a social experiment for them.
I'm really not going to say what gender
they loved their
these
sports
children were.
and they loved their friends, and they passed. It wasn't, but they didn't get really motivated till after high school, and then it was like a light bulb turned on. And I always encourage parents, like, listen, sometimes for the boys it takes a little bit longer.
Sometimes the motivation, by the way, and we could do a whole show on this, on laziness versus productivity, but a lot of times the motivation is, most of the time it's good when you become an adult and you got purpose that's driving that. When you have purpose really driving your activity, it's amazing. When you have the right amount of stress in your life,
healthy
stress, like your wife is upset if you don't get the honeydews done, as they call them. I came home the other day and actually, Gracie wrote me and said, "Hey, Dad, we got a leak under the kitchen sink." I'm like, "Okay, great." And I'm thinking,
Tim the plumber.
So I'm not a plumber, but I thought it had, and I fixed it. So I thought, and I tightened things up, and I saw where it had come loose and so forth. So I tightened it up, and it wasn't leaking. The next day, it started leaking again. And I'm highly motivated to fix this because without it, there's a problem with water all over the place. So that's the motivation.
And you don't want to pay somebody
and I don't want everybody to have to go to another sink to get their dishes done anyway. So got in there, realized that the plumber who did that put in the wrong plumbing. So I had to replace the plumbing under there. And it hasn't leaked so far.
Babe, you're my hero.
Knock on wood or PVC or whatever. Anyway, but I was motivated because the stress of urgency was there. And I don't want to pay a plumber, as you said.
Right.
But and I'll make this point and then we can move on to relationships, fear in relationships. But, make this point about, what was the point I was going to make?
Oh, we were talking about how society sometimes rewards laziness.
This point that I want to make was sometimes the motivation is perfectionism, which can be a problem because then you work yourself, your fingers to the bone, as they say, and you still are not perfect.
Right.
And I am highly motivated in my preparation for presentations such as a message or a podcast or whatever, and I over prepare. And the reason I do that is because I lean a little bit of perfectionist.
Yeah.
So
Me, on the other hand, I'm the lazy girl.
you're not lazy, but I don't think that you're as perfectionistic.
No,
as
I don't struggle with perfectionism.
So,
I'm the color outside the lines girl.
Yeah.
We're the opposite that way. But yeah, I wanted to throw in that, our culture in some ways, can reward laziness and take away, the idea of reward for work, depending on the situations. Now, we know that like our businesses and everything have taken major hits in the last couple of years. And so our government has come forward to like assist and over assist. But then you can have the ones that are actually incarcerated getting the stimulus checks and to the point of, I don't even know how much. And you're
that was a mistake. I mean,
but there are other people who have, been asked to come back to work, and folks don't want to do it.
Well, here's the thing: they're
getting
getting X amount of dollars. See, when you think about people being out of work, and the government wants to make sure we don't have a dip in the economy and keep things moving. Now we have inflation.
Right.
I'm getting into the political aspects, but when you're paying somebody not to work,
right,
you are incentivizing laziness. It becomes a culture of laziness.
Yeah.
And that culture of laziness will never work in society,
Right.
won't work in a family, it won't work in a business. We need people that are motivated, because the best thing we have in this world other than God is people. And that's why we're love God with all of our heart, love others as ourselves. And part of loving is to motivate people to work. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's think about relationships. We had talked about the first two were the fear that keeps us stuck from having good intimate relationships and social interaction, the fear of success. And today we're talking about the fear of relationships. Think about the person you love the most, but what if you're afraid of really drawing close to them because you're afraid that you're going to be rejected?
Right.
I know couples, I've counseled many couples that, and Kimberly has as well, that have had a problem with fear, the fear of intimacy, sexual intimacy, or just even emotional intimacy, or maybe even more importantly, emotional intimacy. And the fear is that they're going to be rejected.
Right.
That what a feeling that is. You married someone, and then you're constantly afraid they're going to reject you, and that's something fundamental about yourself as well. And there's obviously something about the way you're treated, but it may be just something in your own mind.
Absolutely, like the fear of betrayal and projecting things onto your spouse. Like we've shared with folks about that we've been married now 15 years, but because we both had pretty toxic, unhealthy first marriages, you can't help but come out of that situation predisposed to having some baggage, and you don't even realize sometimes you have baggage, even though I feel like both of us felt like the Lord had healed our hearts. It's not until you're back into a situation of a committed relationship that I think the Lord allows you to experience some of those things that were triggers before to help you fully heal once again. But we definitely both had areas that we would project some of our fears from our first relationship and had to work through that. So it took processing through that as a couple for us to build intimacy.
Yeah, and think about that projection too. Let's say you were harmed as a child, maybe sexually mistreated or emotionally abused, and then you get married. That trauma, if not dealt with and handled properly, sometimes a therapist needs to be involved. Sometimes it's just a really good friend who can sit with you in that problem and help you resolve that childhood trauma.
Right.
If it's really intense, I would not hesitate, if I were you, male or female, to go to a therapist, go to a counselor and say, hey, here's my deal. I seem to have difficulty in my relationships. I'm afraid to get close to my husband. I'm afraid to get close to my wife. And I just want to understand what's going on. And maybe they can help you unpack that so that you don't project.
Right.
And I think that's a real big problem. Another one is, let's say as a child, your father, whether you're male or female, or your mom, abandoned you. I know I was counseling a couple. The wife had grown up in a family. The father left them, and then the mother, because the father left to be with another woman, they divorced. The woman turned to alcohol. The mother turned to alcohol. So that child, now grown and married, is struggling with the fact that they had been abandoned. So they're afraid. She is afraid her husband's going to leave her.
Right.
And he's like, if you knew who I was talking about, you wouldn't know who they are. But I mean, just knowing this guy, he was one of those most loyal guys she could have ever married. And God gave her the right husband.
Yeah.
And it took her a long time to realize no matter what. So what she did was she would begin to sabotage their relationship, testing him and sometimes trying to get him to leave.
Yes.
Because that's what she knows.
That happens a lot.
Yeah.
Self-sabotaging because of unhealed, broken places in their past. Yeah.
So one of the things I struggled with when we first got married is because I had never experienced the kind of relationship that we have, which is much more authentic. And, my first marriage, we really tried and we did the best we could with the psychological immaturity and the emotional strength and maturity that we had. But we failed a lot. And so I come into this marriage and I realized that this is the real deal. We can honestly talk about things and struggle through things. But when things were going really well, I started thinking, hey, this is not right. I'm not worthy of this. I didn't feel good enough to have this relationship. And I had to catch myself to not withdraw.
Yeah.
Because, you almost want to sabotage what you don't know.
Right.
And, you have to be careful about that. That your fear does not drive
you right back to the place that you came out of.
Exactly. So whether it's betrayal, abandonment, not feeling worthy, whether it's fear that the marriage is not going to be kind of your family of origin as good as your parents, or maybe it will be exactly like your parents, which was bad. You need to overcome that fear, because that fear is going to sabotage the beauty of that intimacy in that relationship.
Absolutely. So another big topic about fear is how it relates to our parenting and the fear that happens in parenting. And I specifically think of like discipline with kids, depending on your own frame of reference, your background, but a lot of times we repeat patterns that we've seen. We fear that we're going to be our parent, or so we'll swing completely the opposite way, or we do become like our parent.
Yeah.
But a lot of times fear in parenting, it keeps us from disciplining our children for their benefit and not for our egos. So a lot of times out of our own shame or embarrassment of our children and how we think that they're going to make us look, our fear drives us to discipline them in ways that aren't healthy.
I think we've talked about that a lot, that there is this tendency to raise our children for our ego.
Right.
And they're the extension of us. Be honest, when I see pictures of the boys together, when our kids say, "Hey, we're having this sibling party over at somebody's house, Ronnie's or Jesse's or wherever," there is a sense of pride that like they love each other, they like being with each other. When they're struggling with something and they go to their siblings before they come to us, that's a pretty successful thing. So your ego feels pretty good as a parent. What is really troubling is when your children, when you're in those disciplining years, is when you're trying to shape your child to become your ego salve. You're trying to make your life better through your kids. I'll look better. What that does, you lose objectivity and you become subjective. And that fear of failing to make yourself look good through your children will drive you to lose perspective on discipline.
Right. And of
And
course, it
overreact.
leads to a breakdown in the relationship. Also, of course, we fear our kids not turning out well, so we can over discipline in those situations or just be way too strict, which I've seen that, in coming from a ministry home and having so many friends who are pastors' kids. I've seen parents over discipline their own children as examples, to others, and also out of fear that somehow their kids weren't going to turn out being perfect or whatever. And it just drives them to become the bad kids anyway. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many girlfriends I had that were pastors' daughters that just really want nothing to do with the church, which is heartbreaking.
That's sad.
Yeah. But again, it was their motives in doing it were driven out of fear, fear of how they would be perceived as leaders or that their kids weren't going to come out being perfect or whatever that is,
Well, I think about, I'll give you an example. So, you're a 7-year-old little boy with all the little things that go on in a little boy's head, where I want everything to be a game.
Right.
I want everything to be a chase. I want everything to be a sport. I want everything to be competition with my brothers. So we'd get in the auditorium. My father called it the sanctuary.
Yes.
And that sanctuary had pews. It was a nice facility with carpet and, and stained glass windows. And we saw it as like a, place to do roller derby or whatever. Now, we didn't have skates on, but we would sure run around and try to knock each other.
Each other.
Wow, that's hard to say.
Knock each other.
Yeah, we knocked each other over. Anyway, so we'd make a game out of it.
Yeah.
My dad saw that as an insult to himself as a father and a pastor.
Right.
And so, he would say, "Don't run in God's house."
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute.
First of all,
okay.
Jesus didn't build this place.
Yeah.
If he did, there wouldn't be a leak in the roof.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I was just thinking, that when I was a little kid, of course, I felt humiliated by that I was being such a bad kid, a very sinful little child.
Right.
And children are children. They act like children. They're childish.
Right.
And of course, if I continue to do that, that would be different than childishness. That would be rebellion. And I did stop, and that was out of fear. But my dad was afraid of looking bad,
Right.
not to judge my dad's motives, but it's pretty clear to me.
Yes.
He didn't want to look bad because he would even say when we get home, "You are a pastor's son. You have a higher responsibility." That's an awful lot to
Not
put on a
true.
7-year-old, 8-year-old kid.
You were called into ministry. Yeah. That kid was not called.
Yeah.
And he for sure won't feel called if you treat him like that.
And now,
make them an example.
These little kids at our church, I'll chase them around, because I think kids need to be kids. And I do believe that theologically we are the sanctuary of God, not that building. But anyway, that's another thing.
There you go. I was one of the kids that would go in on Communion Sunday with my brothers and suck down their leftover grape juice out of the small cups.
Every pastor's kid
eat
did
those
that.
nasty saltine crackers because we were hungry. It was lunchtime.
Yeah. I remember. Oh my gosh, the communion would come by. And they had the little, and they were glass cups. They were keepsakes. They look like, Lord forgive me, they look like little shot glasses. Yeah. and I would see which one was the fullest before I would choose. And I would take.
Been there.
They took the crackers out, so they had broken up crackers, and I think they were saltines, but anyway. Yeah. And you pick the biggest cracker. Like I hadn't eaten breakfast. Like, what am I trying to get a meal here? This is a pretty bad meal if that's what you're going.
Hey, free food was our favorite food.
The whole point of the Lord's Supper and the communion is to focus on Christ, and I was focused on the biggest cup. And then, of course, I won't go any farther with what I did. But man, I got the best cup.
Yep. So the final thing we're going to talk about in regards to fear and parenting, and then I'll just speak from my own heart on this because I was for sure this mom is, we fear our kids being hurt, so we become overprotective. And I was like helicopter mom pilot 101. Like I was that mom. And I do think the reason why is in my own experience in childhood, I had some things happen. It was a different day and age, and parents weren't as protective. So I experienced some trauma in my childhood and knew the vulnerability in my first marriage. When it dissolved, my children were going back and forth every other weekend with their biological dad, and there was always a revolving door of who was in his life, and even the places that he lived or stayed. And so I had incredible feeling of loss of control in parenting in that situation. So when they were on my clock, I was just, and even when they weren't, it about drove me crazy. But I was for sure probably an overprotective parent. And do I have regrets around that? Yes and no.
Well, I would just say I am married to you with adult children, and you still worry about them.
I spend every night going to bed. My ways of processing stress coming down from anxiety and stress is I just start singing worship, and I start listing off every kid's name. And then last night I went through like the parents that are still with us. I went through the cousins' names, the parents, the children, the grandkids, just to kind of help myself come down off of turning everybody over to Jesus, because you can't manage that. But I do feel like there were seasons in early parenting for me where it was out of control, and the Lord had to remind you. I specifically remember the Lord speaking to my heart saying, your arms can only reach so far in this situation. Mm-hmm. You have to release the grasp that you think you have on them and trust that I've got them in my hands. Yeah. And I reminded myself of that often as I had to let my kids go back and forth. But this whole thing, this trust thing with the Lord, it's a muscle you keep flexing, and it got better for sure. But I think if you are a parent at any age, a grandparent, you still wrestle with fear for the next generation and the generation after that. Yeah. And it's part of being a human on this planet.
That's where you need that faith to trust God for them. Yep. Yeah, I like that illustration of your arms can only go so far, but He can extend beyond that.
His job.
And He cares about them more than
always
we do.
Will care more than we could ever. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, hey, thanks for listening to Hope Rescue Podcast. And we do have this book available, Breathe, Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, and Negative Emotions. I wrote this for you. I hope that you will avail yourself of that. Go to hoperescuepodcast.org. Thanks for listening. Next week, we'll continue on, and we're so glad and so honored that you tuned in today.
Bye, guys.